It started in a crowded docking bay on Station 12 Core, one of the so-called neutral trade ports, orbiting just outside the Tarathian Rim. Neutral was a word thrown around to make diplomats sleep at night. The reality was simple. Whoever had power made the rules, and humans hadn't yet convinced the galaxy that we were dangerous enough to be respected. Not yet. The boy's name was Mick. Barely 6, small for his age, with shaggy brown hair that never seemed to behave, and a crooked front tooth. He was born on that station. Third-generation spacer kid. His father, Thomas, ran a maintenance crew doing dirty, underpaid work on the underbelly of incoming freighters. His mother died 2 years back when a containment leak flooded the lower quarters. Typical spacer tragedy, filed and forgotten by station command within a cycle. Mike was hanging around the docks just like spacer kids do, watching a new group of Zentari soldiers arrive. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even unusual. Hell, most of the time kids waved, and the aliens ignored them. But that day, something was different. The commanding officer of the Zentari group, a tall, thick-skinned bastard with a metal-plated crest and half a dozen rings on his clawed hands, didn't like humans. That much was clear. Mike must have gotten too close, too curious. Maybe he reached for something shiny, or maybe he just smiled in the wrong direction. What mattered is this. The alien turned, snarled in that guttural, insectoid growl, and struck the child so hard he flew backward into a crate of fusion batteries. There were no weapons, no threat, no misunderstanding. Just a 6-year-old kid and a towering alien soldier who decided to make a statement. Mike hit the deck and didn't move. The crowd gasped. A few shrieked. A Sarnak merchant grabbed his own child and pulled him away. No one stepped forward. No one challenged the officer. You could feel the fear in the air like static clinging to skin. Except for one man. Thomas. He was down the corridor, hauling coolant lines, when the emergency broadcast hit his earbud. Medical alert, docking bay 4B. When he heard the words, young human male, unconscious, possible trauma, something inside him cracked wide open. By the time Thomas reached the scene, the med team was there, swarming over Mike's tiny body. Blood smeared the floor. His face was swollen, his arm, bent in a way it shouldn't be. And the Zentari, standing off to the side with 2 subordinates, speaking calmly, not even a hint of remorse, not even a glance towards the boy. Thomas didn't say a word. Not then. Not even when the officer's translator spoke in that smug, flat tone. Your progeny violated proximity protocol. He was corrected. They didn't arrest the alien. They didn't detain him. They didn't even file charges. The station command ruled it an unfortunate incident, pending diplomatic review. While Thomas sat by his son's hospital bed, waiting to find out if Mike would wake up with brain damage, some bureaucrat sent an apology letter to the Zentari military attaché. That was their justice. But humans don't forget. The word spread fast. Too fast. By the next rotation, whispers were flying across the spacer networks, down mining shafts, through backwater colonies and old Earth warships hidden in the outer graves. A human child struck by a galactic officer, with no consequence. They called them Deathworlders as an insult once. Said humans came from a planet too violent, too unpredictable, too savage. Said we were emotionally unstable, reactionary, dangerous. They were right. Thomas didn't have to ask for help. He didn't organize anything. He just sat by his son's bedside, holding that tiny hand, replaying the moment in his head 1,000 times. But elsewhere, men moved. Men who had fought in the silent wars of the Kuiper Break. Men who knew what humans were capable of when you hurt one of their own. The Zentari officer didn't know it yet, but consequences were coming. And this time, the galaxy would learn. Personally. Mike didn't wake up the next day. or the day after. The doctors called it neural shock from traumatic blunt force injury, but all Thomas saw was his boy lying still, wrapped in tubes and wires, half his face bruised purple, the other pale like porcelain. The machines beeped and blinked, counting things that no father should have to stare at this long. He sat in silence. That kind of silence only men know when they've lost too much and aren't allowed to scream. The corridor outside was empty. Even the nurses had stopped making small talk. Everyone knew. Everyone had heard. The humans on the station kept their heads down, their mouths shut. Centauri patrols doubled their rotations, walking proud, claws clinking on the metal floor. Not one of them said a damn word about the boy. But they looked. Every time Thomas passed them, they looked at him with that cold, alien detachment. Like his grief didn't register on whatever passed for morality in their hive-trained minds. And still, no justice came. Station Command claimed their hands were tied. Jurisdictional complications, they said. Political pressure, they added. Be patient, they insisted. Thomas didn't say a word. He just nodded. Every time, he nodded. But inside, something had started to bleed. It was on the fourth night when the first message came in. No name. Just a grainy voice over a scrambled comm frequency. We heard. Thomas stared at the handheld. Who is this? You don't know me, the voice said. But I know what they did, and I know who you are. He almost dropped the device. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't tell anyone. You didn't have to. There was a long pause. Then the voice continued. You remember the freeborns from Deimos Delta? Thomas stiffened. He did. They were ghosts, rumored to be ex-Earthborn mercs, off-grid operators who vanished after the Sovereign Break Wars, last seen raiding pirate warships along the Drakenbelt. No allegiance, no law, just humans who answered to nothing except their own. You're one of them? No, but I know where they'll be in 7 hours. The message cut off. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He watched Mike's chest rise and fall. He watched his boy's tiny fingers twitch in his sleep, maybe from pain, maybe from dreams. He held that small hand and made a decision that no father should ever have to make. He wasn't going to wait for justice. He was going to drag it down with his own hands. By morning, Thomas had packed the bag. Not much. Just enough to move fast. No weapons. No armor. Just old gear from his younger days, back when he'd worn Earth's colors in the mining revolts off Triton's moons. He'd buried that part of himself when his wife died, when Mike was born, when he chose to be a father and not a soldier. But now? Now the soldier had a reason. He left a note with the med nurse, in case Mike woke up before he returned. It was short. Don't be afraid. I'm doing what has to be done. The freighter he hitched a ride on was called Broken Mercy, an old rust bucket barely holding together. Crewed by humans only, faces worn and hard, no questions asked. He didn't have to say who he was. They already knew. One of them, a tall, bald engineer with a face like gravel, patted Thomas on the back as he boarded. Glad you're coming. They were asking for you. Thomas just nodded. The journey was silent. No one spoke of politics. No one brought up treaties. No one quoted station rules. That world, the clean world, the pretend civilized world of fragile diplomacy and false peace, had nothing to offer men like these. They didn't care about seats at the galactic table. They cared about honor, about blood, about what's right. The Broken Mercy dropped out of warp near an abandoned outpost orbiting a dead moon. No lights, no broadcasts, just a small beacon pinging on a secure frequency. Thomas stepped into the bay and saw them. They weren't in uniform. They didn't need to be. You could see it in the way they stood. Every man there had seen war. Not the kind fought on screens, but the dirty kind. Up close, knife to bone, breath on your face kind. Freeborns. There were 8 of them, and every single one was there for him. The leader stepped forward. Big, older, scars all over his arms. No smile, just quiet steel in his eyes. "You're Thomas." "I am." The man nodded. "Then say no more. We fight for your boy." Thomas swallowed hard. "Why?" The man paused. "Because he's ours, and they forgot who the hell we are." The plan was simple. The Zentari officer, Commander Velks, was scheduled to depart Station 12 Corps in 5 days, headed to a ceremonial tribunal on Polaris Prime. That tribunal was a joke. Everyone knew it. A meeting of generals pretending to investigate a public incident while quietly sweeping it under the rug. He'd walk free. That couldn't happen. The Freeborns had hacked into the transport manifests. They knew the route, the ship, the times. The vessel was heavily guarded, diplomatically sealed, shielded by treaties. Touching it would make Earth look like warmongers. Good. That's exactly what they wanted. They weren't going to hide what they did. They wanted every species watching. They intercepted the diplomatic ship mid-jump. Not with a war fleet, but with something worse. A boarding team of Deathworld-born humans who didn't care about laws anymore. The assault was fast. Surgical. They cut into the ship with grav torches, disabling comms in under 2 minutes. Airlock breach, flash grenades, shock rounds. The Zentari guards never had a chance. Their neural disruptors didn't work on men who'd rewired their pain responses years ago. Thomas led the breach. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the strongest. But he was the reason they were there. He found Commander Velks in the central chamber, still wearing his medals, still holding that smug stance, even as blood pooled around the walls. "You," Velks spat through the translator. "This is an act of war." Thomas didn't respond. He just stepped forward and raised the stun blade. Velks charged. Thomas sidestepped and drove the blade through the alien's chest, slow, not for efficiency, but for memory, so that Velks would remember the face of the man who came for him. So the last thing he saw wasn't a court, or a council, or a peacekeeper, but a father. The blade cracked through plating and bone, and Velks let out a low, keening screech as his blood hit the floor. Thomas didn't say a word. He let the silence answer. They didn't run. They could have, but they didn't. The Freeborn sent a message directly to the Galactic Council, a simple one. This is not revenge. This is precedent. Attached was a still frame of Velks's body, and next to it, a picture of Mech, hooked to machines, bandaged, innocent. The message spread, not just among the Council, but through the entire spacer net, through mining colonies, through Merc channels, through dead zone frequencies. Humans everywhere saw it. Fathers, brothers, sons. And they remembered. Remembered that no matter how civilized the galaxy claimed to be, it still let a child get beaten in broad daylight and did nothing. But the humans? They did something. They made sure everyone knew what happens when you harm one of ours. Mike woke up 2 days later. His head hurt. His arm was in a cast. But he was alive. The nurse smiled, tears in her eyes, and handed him a small metal pendant. It wasn't much. Just a battered old piece of steel, shaped like Earth. On the back, scratched by hand, were the words, "You're never alone. Your blood is ours." Mike didn't understand it fully. But he held it tight anyway. Thomas didn't come back to the station. He stayed with the Freeborns, not because he wanted war, but because he'd seen what peace without power really looked like. And he knew, now more than ever, that sometimes you don't get justice by asking for it. You take it. With your own hands. The first news broadcast was cautious. A diplomatic channel on the Terran fringe issued a security alert about a human-led assault on a Zentari diplomatic vessel. No footage, no names, no blood, just polished language, carefully vague. But the truth didn't stay in a file. It spread like infection. The image of Velx's body, pierced, collapsed, the once proud officer lying in his own fluids, circulated through military-only comms, jumped into merchant feeds, and soon hit the public networks. Someone leaked the death footage, too. Not all of it, but enough. The strike, the scream, Thomas's face as he walked away from the kill. There was no denying it now. A human father had taken vengeance into his own hands, and survived long enough to show the galaxy how it's done. Some called it a war crime. Some called it justice. But nobody ignored it. The Galactic Council convened within 12 hours. Representatives of 87 species met in the sterilized core of Astra Prime, a place where conflict was traditionally spoken about, never seen. The room was shaped like a circle, a design meant to symbolize unity. But that day, it felt like a cage. The Zentari envoy was first to speak. High tones, measured words, utter outrage. This was an execution of a ranking officer under diplomatic protection. It undermines every treaty we've built for the last century. The Zentari blamed Earth directly, calling for sanctions, suspensions, and if not military retaliation, then something close to it. But Earth's seat, occupied by Ambassador Holden, a civilian diplomat and not a soldier, didn't apologize. He didn't even flinch. Commander Velx beat a 6-year-old human child, Holden said calmly, in a public space with no provocation, and suffered no consequence. Your own tribunal was going to let him walk. The room stirred, buzzing with whispers. Let's be honest, Holden continued, rising to his feet. This council loves order, stability, but not justice, not when it's inconvenient. You let an innocent boy get put in a coma, and then acted surprised when his people reminded you what that costs. This was vigilantism, barked a Solari noble. No, Holden said. This was consequence, delivered personally. The room fell silent. Some alien factions wanted war, others wanted appeasement, a few wanted to quietly bury the matter and return to business. But something else was happening, something not on official agendas. The humans in the room weren't looking for peace anymore. They were waiting to see who would threaten them, and who would stand beside them. Meanwhile, across the stars, Mick's story exploded. Not because he was anyone important, not because of his bloodline or some chosen one prophecy, but because he was just a child, a normal, fragile human kid, and that made him everybody's kid. His recovery became a broadcast event. Every update from the station's med center was downloaded, reshared, translated into 40 languages. His swollen eye healing. His breathing returning to normal, his hand squeezing his nurse's finger, and then, finally, the moment his eyes opened. That clip alone was viewed 300 million times in a day. Mike, blinking, whispering one word. Dad? Thomas saw the footage from a secure outpost hidden in the asteroid fields. The Freeborns didn't show much emotion, but that day, when they saw Mick's face on the screen, not one of them pretended to be hard. They gathered around Thomas like a shield, quiet, not speaking, just there. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just watched the screen, hand clenched into a fist. One of the younger Freeborns, a kid from Mars-born mining stock, finally broke the silence. That boy, he's going to be the reason they stop treating us like rats. Thomas looked at him. No, he said. He's going to be the reason we stop letting them. On Earth, protests began. They started peaceful, vigils, speeches, signs, images of Mike held high next to the caption, "What if it was your son?" But it didn't stay peaceful. When the Council tried to force the extradition of Thomas and the Freeborns, Earth refused, flatly, without compromise. They said, "Thomas acted outside of our command, but we do not condemn him." And for the first time, humanity didn't back down. That refusal triggered riots on fringe worlds, not by humans, but by other species who had long watched their own children get treated as collateral damage by militarized regimes like the Zentaris. A Nuvarian merchant posted, if they struck a Zentari hatchling, Earth would have been bombed, but they hit a human child, and Earth answered in blood. That's the kind of ally I want. A Veltari rebel general wrote, "The humans didn't bring a lawsuit. They brought a blade, finally. Someone who still remembers what justice smells like." The galaxy had spent decades taming humanity. Diplomats had scrubbed their reputation, trained them to be compliant citizens of a larger, peaceful order. But that illusion had cracked. And under it all, the old Earth still burned. The death world instinct. Meanwhile, on Station 12 Core, things had changed. The Zentari withdrew their soldiers from the docks. The human workers, quiet, exhausted, long beaten down, stood a little straighter. People who once crossed the street when they saw an alien officer now stared them down. Mike was moved out of intensive care and into a private room, guarded quietly by off-duty mechanics, freight haulers, ex-Marines pretending to be janitors. Thomas wasn't there. But everyone could feel his presence, especially the station command, who issued a pathetic apology and offered Thomas a full pardon if he would de-escalate the tension. The Freeborns laughed. "De-escalate?" their leader growled. No, the tension's the only thing keeping that boy alive." Back on Astra Prime, debates turned ugly. The humans were now polarizing. To some species, especially those ruled by militaristic regimes, they were becoming dangerous again. The memory of old Earth wars came rushing back. Cities turned to ash, ships ripped apart in orbit, the relentless human refusal to be conquered. But to others, Earth was becoming a beacon, a race that protected its own, that didn't abandon its weak, that answered violence with steel. Recruitment requests for human soldiers skyrocketed on the black market. Freeborn chapters, once whispered rumors, became a movement. And everywhere Mike's name was spoken, people said the same thing. They hit the boy, and the humans hit back. Mike, now healing, asked about his dad every day. The nurses didn't know what to say. They'd been ordered not to mention the operation, not to tell a child that his father had killed a galactic officer and set the system on fire. But Mike already knew. Kids know, especially spacer kids. He didn't cry much, just held that steel Earth pendant, worn and scratched, with Thomas's initials carved into the back. He asked the nurse once, "Is my dad bad now?" The nurse knelt beside him, took his hand, eyes glassy. "No," she whispered. "Your dad did what no one else would." Meek looked down at the pendant. "Then I want to be like him when I grow up." And somewhere deep in uncharted space, Thomas listened to the same words, broadcast through a secured relay hidden from official eyes. He smiled. But it wasn't a proud smile. It was broken. Quiet. Because men like Thomas don't get to come home. Men like him stay out there, in the black, protecting what the clean worlds can't. Mike was walking again. Slowly, like his little legs had forgotten how to trust the floor beneath them. The doctors said he'd heal. Maybe even completely. But the damage wasn't just physical. There were nights he'd scream in his sleep. Nights he'd wake up in cold sweats, clutching that metal pendant like it was the only real thing in the world. He never talked about the strike, never asked why it happened. Only once did he whisper, "Did I do something wrong?" And no one in the room could answer fast enough. In the outer systems, the consequences were beginning to bite back. The Zentari didn't sit idle after Velx's death. Their pride was wounded, and wounded predators don't beg for justice. They come back hunting. Within 10 cycles of the broadcast, Zentari ships began pulling human freighters out of warp. Inspections, they called them, but the crews didn't come back. Small colonies, especially those on fringe planets without council protection, reported disappearances, harassment, stations stripped of supplies, human miners choked off from their only trade lanes, and worse, rumors of black ships, unmarked, moving through dead zones and abducting entire outposts. Everyone knew what it meant. Retaliation, but not by war, by silence. They wanted humanity to be afraid again, quiet, controlled, the way it was before Thomas plunged that blade into Velx's chest. But it was too late for that now, because humans weren't the only ones watching. On New Ishtar, a desert colony where humans had long shared land with the Vakari, a once enslaved reptilian race, a rally broke out. Not about resources, not about trade, but about mech. Dozens of Vakari carried signs. Human or hatchling, protect the innocent. They painted the boy's face on walls. Not a leader, not a warrior, just a child, broken by arrogance and saved by fury. When station security tried to break it up, they were met with a resistance they hadn't expected. Vakari miners side by side with human engineers. Blunt tools turned weapons, not to kill, just to send a message. You hit one of ours, we hit back, just like Earth. Back on the diplomatic front, the council was fracturing. The Zentari kept pushing for punishment. Give us Thomas, give us the freeborns, disband the rogue human units. Earth refused. Ambassador Halden, who had once been considered soft, a paper pusher, a compromise man, now stood behind the podium with iron in his voice. Humanity will not apologize for defending its children. When the Zentari envoy pressed further, Halden raised a datapad. It displayed 14 confirmed cases of Zentari abuses over the last 2 cycles. Children struck, miners assaulted, civilians executed. Where was your outrage then? He asked. Where was your justice? There was no answer, because the room knew the truth. Velx wasn't an exception. He was a system. And Thomas didn't break the law. He broke the silence. But not all of humanity was unified. On Earth, tension brewed between factions. The United Earth Coalition, desperate to maintain council approval, distanced itself from Thomas publicly. Called the freeborns unregulated, unpredictable, dangerous. But in the streets, in the alleys, in the broken zones where war veterans slept and dockhands worked 16-hour shifts just to keep the lights on? Thomas was a goddamn hero. Graffiti marked the undercities. One swing for a child, one war for a future. He bled for his son. We bleed for him. A movement formed. Not political, not clean, raw, angry, male, protective. They called themselves Bloodline, not a militia, not yet. But a promise. That no human child would be harmed again without consequence. Mike didn't understand all of this. He still played with old toy ships, dragging them across his hospital bed like nothing had changed. But the adults saw it. The shift. Guards outside his room now wore armor. Visitors were vetted by armed veterans. And his nurse, once chatty and soft-spoken, now kept a sidearm holstered at her hip, just in case. One day, Mike looked up at her and asked, "Did I start a war?" The nurse crouched beside him. "No," she said. "They did, when they thought they could hit you and walk away." Thomas wasn't sleeping either. He stayed deep in the asteroid fields, rotating between hidden stations, keeping one step ahead of bounty hunters and council trackers. His face was now the most wanted in the quadrant. A reward was posted. 100,000 credits for capture. 1 million if delivered alive. It didn't scare him. He'd already died the day Velx hit his son. What lived now was something else. But what did shake him, what stopped him cold, was when he received the encrypted packet from Earth. A video. Mike, sitting up in bed, pale, thin, but alive, looking into the camera with wide, unblinking eyes. "Hi, Dad." Thomas pressed his hand against the screen. Said nothing. Just watched. Mike's voice was quiet, almost unsure. "They say you did something bad, but they don't look mad. Some of them smile when they say your name." A long pause. Then, "I know you didn't mean to be gone. I know you're out there, and I'm not scared." Thomas's chest tightened. Mike's eyes dropped, voice a whisper. "Just don't let them hurt anyone else." That was it. 6 words. 6 goddamn words. And something inside Thomas hardened into stone. 1 week later, an assassination attempt hit the station, not by a Zentari, not by aliens, by a human. A coalition-aligned mercenary with a clean badge, falsified orders, and a poison capsule tucked in his molar. He got within 6 meters of Mike's door before a janitor stopped him. Only it wasn't a janitor. It was Jack, a freeborn sniper who hadn't left the boy's side since the strike. The assassin never made it out of the hallway. Jack didn't speak, just fired one shot, center mass, left the body where it fell. The message was clear. Human or alien, it didn't matter. You try to harm the boy again, you leave in a bag. The council erupted. "How can you let terrorists guard a child?" they screamed. But public opinion had shifted. Even non-human civilians began asking, why is a child being targeted at all? And for the first time in decades, Earth wasn't defending itself. It was standing still, staring the galaxy down, daring it to make a move. Thomas sent a message back, a single line. "You want war? Try to touch him again." Then he disappeared back into the dark. Mike was 5 weeks into recovery when the first banner appeared. It wasn't official, it wasn't legal, but it was massive. Hung from a freight crane on the edge of Docking Bay 12 Core, it stretched 20 feet across, scrawled in burning red paint on blackout canvas. "You touched one of ours. Now bleed." Beneath the words was a crude but unmistakable stencil. A child's face, Mick's face, eyes closed, bandaged, half of it still bruised. It didn't take long for similar banners to appear across the human-occupied sectors. On old freighters, on bar walls, on the side of asteroid silos, in abandoned warships drifting through the dark like tombs. The same message, the same face. Mike had become the flag. He didn't understand what was happening, not really. He still played with his ships, still asked for juice he couldn't drink yet. But sometimes, when he'd wake up from those shallow, exhausted naps, he'd see the adults outside the medbay window. Men with scars, women in flight suits, old soldiers with tired eyes, all of them watching him, not with pity, with purpose. One afternoon, he asked the nurse, Lyra, the only one he trusted, "Why do they keep looking at me like that?" She didn't know how to answer at first, but Mick had stopped accepting soft lies. He wasn't 6 anymore. So she sat on the edge of his bed and told the truth. "They're waiting to see if you're going to be all right, not just your body, all of you, because what happened to you, it changed things. For them. For all of us." Mike tilted his head. "I didn't mean to change anything. I know." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I just want my dad." Lyra nodded slowly. "So do they." But Thomas hadn't returned. He was in deep space, orbiting a dead star, hidden in a freeborn cruiser disguised as a mining rig. He saw everything. The banners, the rallies, the transmission data spikes showing Mick's face on more walls than Earth's flag. And he hated it. This wasn't what he wanted. He'd done what he did because his son had been hurt, because justice was denied, because he was a father, not a martyr, not a spark for war. But now the fire had taken its own form, and it wasn't listening to him anymore. Bloodline had grown faster than any human movement since the Unity Accords. It started as whispers, then chapters, then fleets. They weren't official. They didn't follow Earth's military code, but they had power. Station by station, they began declaring independent protection zones. Bloodline sectors, they called them. Any human child harmed in those zones, the response was immediate, not diplomatic, terminal. They didn't ask Earth's permission. They didn't need it. Some council envoys demanded Earth put a stop to it, but the Earth coalition was divided now, fractured between appeasers and hardliners, between those afraid of losing galactic legitimacy and those who'd grown tired of begging to be respected. Earth couldn't control Bloodline anymore. No one could. At a council meeting in the core spiral, a Varan senator stood up, voice shaking. You told us humanity had evolved, that they were tamed. But this boy, they are rallying armies around a child. They're making him a symbol of revenge. To which Ambassador Halden calmly replied, No, they're rallying around the reason that child was harmed and the silence that followed. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine the silence. Mick was moved off station. Too many threats, too many cameras, too many men whispering his name with either worship or hatred. They transferred him to a hidden station known only to freeborn operatives and a few trusted Earth sympathizers, people who remembered what justice looked like before treaties diluted it. It was colder there, quieter, and lonelier. Lyra stayed with him, though. She'd been offered reassignment, even money to keep quiet and disappear. She refused. Not because she believed in the movement, but because she believed in Mike. One evening, while Lyra dozed off in the corner, Mike stood at the viewport, hands on the glass. A planet drifted in the distance. Dead. No light. No life. He didn't know what it was called, but he whispered to it anyway. Do stars ever forget things? Lyra stirred. What, sweetheart? He didn't turn around. I mean, when something really bad happens, do stars forget? She rose and crossed to him, stood behind him quietly. No, she said, but maybe they keep shining so we don't have to. Mike leaned his forehead against the cold glass. I wish they could just forget me. Meanwhile, Thomas received an offer. From Earth, a full pardon. If he returned. If he spoke to the movement. If he told them to stand down. The message came from someone he once trusted, General Karen, a soldier who'd once bled in the same trenches Thomas had. Now a politician. Karen's voice was firm, rehearsed. This is getting too big. You lit the fire, but we're the ones burning for it now. The Council's threatening trade blocks, embargoes, even sanctions on families of freeborns. You need to stop this. Thomas didn't respond right away. He stared at the blinking cursor on the comms unit, and then finally he answered, I didn't light the fire. I just refused to let it go out in silence. Back in the dark corridors of the movement, things were getting darker. Bloodline had begun fracturing too. Some wanted protection, order, retaliation only if provoked. But others wanted war, pure war. They'd seen what one father could do, what one strike could spark, and now they wanted more. They started targeting not just Zentari, but any species that allied with them. Merchants, civilians, colonies. Thomas received footage. A Zentari supply ship attacked mid-warp. Crew vented into space. No mercy, no messages, just death. And the Bloodline flag burned into the hull afterward. He punched the wall so hard he broke 3 knuckles. This wasn't justice anymore. This was vengeance unchained. Mike's health improved. He could walk without pain now, could run, though he didn't. He read books, played with old Earth puzzles, stared at the stars, and he asked about his father every day. Lyra tried to keep him distracted. But children like Mick, spacer-born, grief-raised, know how to hear between silences, so one day he asked plainly, "Did he do something wrong?" Lyra took a long breath. "He did something most people wouldn't have had the strength to do." Mick nodded, slowly, then looked at her. Eyes harder than they should have been. "Will I have to do it someday too?" Back in Freeborn Command, Thomas made a decision. He contacted Halden, against protocol, against orders, face to face. "I need to see him," Thomas said. Halden looked exhausted. Gray. "It'll only pour fuel on the fire." Thomas leaned forward. "Then let it burn. But I'm not letting my son grow up with a revolution written on his face." There was silence. Then Holden spoke quietly. "There's something you need to see first." He sent him a file. Mick, in bed, hands trembling, whispering, "Tell him I'm not scared. I just want him to come home." Thomas closed his eyes and gave the only order that mattered now. They brought Thomas in under blackout protocol. No transponders, no beacon trails, no escort ships. The Freeborn cruiser that ferried him moved like a ghost through dead zones, hopping between warped navigation fields and old wreck belts. The men inside didn't talk much. Not out of fear, these were killers, but out of respect, reverence. Because Thomas wasn't just a father anymore. He was a living warning. And warnings had power in this new galaxy. The secure facility where Mike had been moved wasn't technically on any map. It was carved into a derelict mining ring orbiting a hollowed-out moon, one abandoned by a failed colony decades ago. A perfect hiding place, or a prison, depending on how you looked at it. Only 5 people knew Thomas was coming. Earth's ambassador Halden, the Freeborn chapter leader, Lyra the nurse, and 2 men who used to call Thomas Captain in a war humanity no longer officially recognized. Everyone else? In the dark. Because if the Council learned Thomas was within reach, it wouldn't just be bounty hunters coming next time, it would be fleets. Mike stood by the observation window when he saw the ship arrive. He didn't react at first, not outwardly, but his hand gripped the steel pendant around his neck until his fingers went white. He turned to Lyra. "Is that him?" She nodded. Mike's voice dropped, barely a whisper. "I thought he'd look different." "He probably does," she replied. "On the inside." The elevator hissed open with a sound too soft for how loud Thomas's presence felt. He stepped into the hallway, slow, steady. Dressed in matte black combat gear, stripped of insignias. His beard was longer now, face more carved than aged, eyes darker, like something inside him had been hollowed out to make room for what he'd become. Mike stood at the far end. No guards, no doctors, just the boy and the man who'd burned a hole through the galaxy for him. Neither moved. For 10 long seconds, silence ruled the room. Then Mick spoke. "You're real." Thomas exhaled, slow. "Yeah. You killed him." It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded once. Mick blinked hard, like he was trying to make sense of something much bigger than his years. "Did it help?" Thomas stepped forward, each step careful, like approaching something wild and wounded. "No," he said quietly, "but it stopped the bleeding." Mick's eyes glistened. "Mine or yours?" Thomas swallowed. "Both." They didn't hug. Not right away. Not like in the stories. Thomas crouched in front of his son, slowly, until they were eye level. "I shouldn't have left you." "You didn't leave," Mick said. "You went to war." Thomas's lips trembled. "I never wanted you to be part of this." Mick's small voice was like a knife. I didn't get a choice. Thomas looked down, ashamed. I know. Mick's fingers reached out and touched the side of his father's face. I still want you back. They sat together on the floor. No guards, no weapons. Just them, father and son, surrounded by a galaxy set on fire. Lyra stayed at the edge of the room, silently watching, arms crossed tightly across her chest. She'd seen miracles in medicine, never thought she'd witness one in war. Thomas looked at her. Thank you. She shook her head. Don't thank me. Just don't vanish again. Thomas nodded. I won't. Not unless they take him from me. A quiet beat. Lyra's voice dropped. They're trying. News of Thomas's presence leaked. Whether by mistake or betrayal, it didn't matter. Within hours of his landing, 3 different surveillance probes picked up unusual warp shadows near the mining ring. One was clearly Zentari in origin. The other 2, unknown. Bloodline operatives went on alert. The movement had always operated in the shadows, in the cracks between law and chaos. But now, with Thomas on the grid and Mike in the open, they were vulnerable. And there were people, many, who wanted to shut both of them up. Permanently. General Karen called. The same man who had once fought beside Thomas now looked at him through a secure channel with tired fury in his eyes. You were supposed to disappear. Thomas stood still in the comm room, hands behind his back. I changed my mind. This is going to kill us. You coming back, showing your face, Mike being seen with you. Bloodline's gone rogue. They're not soldiers anymore. They're terrorists. No, Thomas said flatly. They're men without a voice. That's what happens when people wait too long to speak. Karen's tone sharpened. If this escalates, we lose our seat at the council. We lose protections. We lose everything Earth has built. Thomas leaned in. We already lost something more important. Karen scoffed. What? Thomas's voice was ice. Fear. Later that night, Thomas sat beside Mick as he slept. The boy's face was soft again. Peaceful. You wouldn't know he'd become a symbol, an icon, used to rally fleets and movements and riots across half the spiral arm. And Thomas hated it. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He'd killed a monster to protect his son. He didn't mean to become one. A sharp knock at the door. Thomas stood instantly. Jack entered. Still armored. Still quiet. A veteran's kind of quiet. He didn't waste time. We've got movement on the outer rim. Fast ships, could be mercs, could be worse. We need to extract. Thomas shook his head. Not without him. We can't protect this station if they hit hard. Then we bleed, Thomas said. We stand. For once we make them come through us. Jack didn't argue. He just nodded. Because that's the kind of man Thomas was now, and the kind of man others followed into the fire. Meanwhile, in orbit, the ships came. 2 mercenary carriers. Old tech, modified, and 1 Zentari dread frigate, holding just outside weapons range. Officially, they were on observation. Unofficially, everyone knew why they were here. To see if Thomas would run. To see if the humans would bow. To see if the message could be buried. But something unexpected happened. A dozen old human warships dropped out of warp. No flags, no orders, just a response. Freeborn, Bloodline, retired Earth Navy, smugglers, mercs, even miners. They formed a wall between the station and the dread frigate. No threats issued, no demands made, just a simple transmission sent out on all bands. You touched one of ours. You want to finish the job? Come through us. The Zentari didn't fire. They watched. And then they turned away. Because not even monsters want to fight men with nothing left to lose. Mike woke up the next morning and found Thomas asleep in the chair next to him. He climbed out of bed, quietly, and sat in his father's lap. Thomas stirred, looked down. "Hey." Mick leaned his head against his chest. "Did we win?" Thomas didn't know how to answer, so he just held him. Mike didn't go back to the medical bed after the ships left. He refused. He stayed close to Thomas, his small hand gripping his father's wrist like the world would tilt sideways if he let go. The doctors said he was healing well, physically at least. But there was something different now. Some wire had been cut and reconnected. He didn't laugh, didn't cry either. He just watched people too long when they spoke, like he was trying to see if they were lying. And when someone said the word hero, his face went flat. The media requests started immediately, even from Earth channels. One host offered a full interview, high security, pre-screened questions, PR-approved editing. They said it could help human morale. Show Mike as strong, recovered, brave, inspire hope. Lyra shut it down before it ever reached Thomas. But it didn't stop there. A popular outer colony band released a song called Steel Sun. It went viral. Half anthem, half funeral dirge, it played over a video montage of Thomas's strike, Mike's bruised face, and slow zooms of protesters raising their fists under banners that read, "Mike lives, we rise." Thomas saw the footage and walked out of the room. He went to the firing range, loaded an old slug pistol, and emptied an entire clip into a wall that didn't deserve it. Bloodline operatives reached out again. This time it wasn't just support. It was a request, or maybe a demand, buried in flattery. They wanted Mike to speak. One message read, "He doesn't have to call for war, he just has to say he's not afraid. The galaxy needs to see that their fear didn't break him." Thomas deleted it without responding, but Jack brought it up anyway. "You knew this was coming." "I know," Thomas said, jaw tight. Jack watched him. "If he says nothing, they'll say you're hiding him. If he speaks, they'll twist it into whatever they need. I don't want him to be a weapon." "He already is." Thomas sat with Mike later that night. Just the two of them, on the edge of the old mining ring, watching a dead star pulse in the distance like a heartbeat that never stopped. Mike was quiet. His legs swung slowly off the ledge, toes brushing metal. "They want me to talk, don't they?" he asked. Thomas stiffened. "Who told you that?" "No one. But I'm not stupid. They all look at me like I'm supposed to do something." "You're not," Thomas said firmly. "You're supposed to get better, that's it." Mike looked at the star. "What if I don't want to get better?" Thomas turned sharply. "Don't say that." Mike didn't blink. "They'll always look at me like I'm the kid who got hit, the kid who made everyone angry. I can't go back to just being Mike anymore." Thomas felt something crack inside. He tried to hold it together, tried to breathe. "I never wanted this for you." "I know," Mick whispered. "But it's mine now." Across the spiral, chaos grew sharper. 3 human-owned cargo lanes were attacked in a single week. No one claimed responsibility, but all signs pointed to Zentari sympathizers. They weren't killing for tactics. They were making statements. One freighter was boarded, stripped, and burned in orbit above a neutral moon. Before the ship detonated, the crew, 6 men, 2 women, sent one last message. "They killed a child. We die knowing we answered." Their words spread through colonies like wildfire. Meanwhile, Thomas faced an impossible choice. Earth's military council contacted him again. Their message was careful, controlled. "We're losing the narrative. The council is considering action. If we don't show control, if we don't distance ourselves from bloodline, human colonies may lose defense funding, trade, even representation. We need Mike to appear, with you. Say it's over. Say we're healed. Say something that lets them back off without losing face." Thomas stared at the message and saw what it really said. Sell your son's image. Pretend we're fine. Give the galaxy what it wants. He didn't respond, but he did tell Mick. They were in a quiet corridor, away from the eyes and cameras and whispers. He crouched down again, same as he did the first time they reunited. There's going to be pressure. People are scared. They want peace. Mike stared at him. Do you? Thomas paused. Then, honestly, I want you safe, whatever it takes. Mike nodded, slowly, like he was thinking through something too big for his age. Will talking make me safe? Thomas didn't answer. Mick asked again. Will being quiet make it worse? Still no answer. Mike turned away. Then let me talk. They didn't stage it. There was no camera crew, no PR firm, no advisors. Jack set up a single transmission node, encrypted, routed through 100 shadow relays. Mike sat in a plain gray room. No flags, no symbols, just himself. Thomas stood off camera, watching, fists clenched. Lyra hit the record, and the boy spoke. Hi, he began, voice small but steady. My name's Mick. You already know that, probably. He glanced at the floor, then back at the lens. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask to get hit. I didn't ask to be a symbol or a reason for fighting. A pause. Deep breath. But I'm not scared anymore. I was. I used to be scared of going to sleep, scared of the machines, scared of waking up without my dad. But now, I'm just tired of people asking if I'm going to make a speech. A flicker of something like a smile. So here it is. He leaned forward. You don't get to hurt people like me and walk away. You don't get to say it was protocol or a misunderstanding. I didn't understand either. I just got hurt. Another pause. The smile was gone now. I didn't want war. I still don't. But if standing up makes you angry, maybe you were the problem to begin with. He looked down, picked up the earth pendant hanging around his neck, and held it up. This is what I have. This and my dad. That's all. And we're not going to run anymore. Lyra cut the feed. The reaction was seismic. Within hours, Mike's words were translated into 112 languages. Council halls played the footage. Colonies broadcast it to crowds. Merchants on trade ships played it during shifts. And the Zentari? They issued a formal statement, one that felt colder than any before. This child has become a political weapon. We will not negotiate with terrorism wrapped in sentiment. Which was the wrong thing to say, because for every human watching, it confirmed the truth they already knew. They didn't see a boy. They saw leverage, and that made it personal. Tomas watched the footage replayed for the 5th time that night. He sat alone in a comms chamber, the pendant Mike had shown resting in his hand. He should have been proud. Instead, he felt hollow. Because he saw the weight behind Mick's eyes now, and he knew it would never go away. Later, Lyra found him sitting in the dark. You did good, she said. He shook his head. He did. I just let it happen. She stood beside him. He's never going to be a normal kid again. I know. He might not live long. I know that too. She leaned in. But maybe, just maybe, he'll live free. War didn't start with a declaration. It started with silence. For 12 days after Mick's broadcast, the council said nothing. No votes, no statements, no public hearings, just empty chambers and shuffled meetings. The galaxy held its breath. Then, on the 13th day, it happened. A human relief vessel, hauling food and medicine to a hybrid refugee colony, was intercepted by a Zentari escort. No warnings were given, no dialogue recorded. No distress signal broadcast. They boarded. They executed the entire crew, all of them, 12 humans, 2 hybrids, a doctor, and a child. Burned the bodies and dumped the ship in the gravity well of a red dwarf. When Earth requested an inquiry, the Centauri released a single line in reply. They were sympathizers of rebellion. We ended it. Thomas watched the footage of the drifting wreckage in silence. His hands didn't shake. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't cry. He simply stood up, walked to the center of the Freeborn command room, and gave the order no one ever thought he'd say. Open every channel, all frequencies, galactic-wide. The comms officer turned slowly. You sure? Thomas nodded. Let the galaxy know. The broadcast was short. Thomas stood in front of the Freeborn flag. Not the Earth flag. Not Bloodline's crimson insignia. Just a gray steel banner marked with one black line, the mark of men who no longer asked for permission. His voice was low, controlled. We tried diplomacy. You gave us silence. We tried justice. You gave us protocol. We tried peace. You gave us graves. He paused, looked into the camera like he was speaking to one person. You want to end this? You want to silence my son, my people? A beat. Come and try. Then he stepped back, and the signal cut. The galaxy responded in kind. The Centauri mobilized a fleet, officially under the banner of containment enforcement. Hundreds of vessels, carriers, strikers, dread ships. It wasn't peacekeeping, it was war. But they weren't expecting what came next. Because Earth didn't just respond, humanity answered. Bloodline chapters lit up across the rim. They weren't military, not in structure. But they were everywhere, embedded in stations, colonies, ports, veterans, miners, former smugglers, engineers, survivors, and they struck. Fast, they crippled fuel routes, sabotaged supply chains, hacked comms satellites. Centauri ships started disappearing in deep space. The Council called it terrorism. But most of the galaxy? They called it payback. And in the center of it all? Mike. Still just a boy. But now the face of a movement too big to cage. Thomas had a decision to make. He could keep running, bouncing between hideouts, keeping Mike safe and distant. Or he could go where it all started. Back to Station 12 Core, where the strike happened, where Mike bled, where the first silence began. He asked Mike if he wanted to go. The boy didn't hesitate. The station hadn't changed much. Still gray steel corridors and flickering lights. Still the same docking bay Thomas used to walk through, carrying coolant packs, his shirt soaked with oil. But now every human they passed stopped. Some saluted. Some simply nodded. But none looked away. When they reached the medical wing, Lyra was already there, waiting, still in her coat, still wearing a tired fire behind her eyes. I told them this place wasn't safe, she said. Thomas shook his head. There's no safe anymore, only loud. The Council issued a final offer. Turn over Thomas and the Freeborns, disband Bloodline, denounce the uprising, and we will negotiate limited protection for human colonies. It was sent to Earth, not to Thomas, but Earth sent back a message of its own. One sentence. You don't speak for our children anymore. When the Centauri fleet entered human space, they expected fear. They expected surrender. Instead, they were met with chaos. Human warships that should have been scrap lit up like fire. Stations with no tactical relevance suddenly became death traps. Merchant vessels stopped running and started ramming. The old veterans called it the fire line, because wherever you crossed it, something burned. Back on Station 12 Core, Thomas took Mike to the dock where it all happened. The crate Mike had been thrown into was gone. The floor had been cleaned. But the wall still bore a dent where Mike's head had struck it. Mike stood in front of it, hands at his side. This is where it started, he said. Thomas stood behind him. No, this is where it ended for them. Mike looked up. What about us? Thomas crouched beside him. That's up to you. The battle for the soul of humanity wasn't fought with fleets or words. It was fought in the eyes of the people watching. Alien races that had always seen humans as volatile, emotional, unruly, now saw something else. Conviction. Unflinching protection. Rage, yes, but righteous rage. The kind that only comes when someone strikes your blood and walks away from it. Mike never made a speech again. He didn't need to. Others did it for him. His image was burned into murals on Mars colonies, sewn into shoulder patches on bloodline armor, carved into the hilt of a dagger carried by a mute Veltari warrior who said humans taught him what family meant. Even Zentari civilians began to question their leadership. If one boy can make a species fight like that, maybe they were never the monsters. Months later, when the war cooled into a tense ceasefire, Thomas and Mike were offered exile, a quiet planet, new names, peace. But Thomas declined. Mike did too, because they understood something now. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure no child, anywhere, ever had to beg for justice again. Mike turned 8 on a ship headed for a liberated trade ring. The crew sang off-key. Thomas gave him a new pendant, this one made from the melted-down shell casing of the round that killed the assassin sent after him. It read, "I survived. You don't get to forget me." Mike wore it like armor. Thomas never found peace. He didn't want it. He stayed with the freeborns, trained, led, bled. But at night, he'd watch Mick sleep and remember the silence after the strike, that deep, aching nothingness, and he'd whisper, "Never again. Not one of ours. Not ever." Epilogue. Years later, a young alien diplomat would sit in a council hearing and ask, "Why do humans fight like they have nothing left?"